The inspection yard of Orion Intergalactic Academy shimmered beneath the triple suns of planet Virex 4. It was the first day of the Survival Sector Challenge, an annual tradition dreaded and revered by cadets across the galaxy. Dozens of species, each with their own customs, technologies, and survival philosophies, stood shoulder to shoulder in formation, their gear laid out in front of them in pristine rows. Commander Greln, a hulking member of the Rorthak species known for his brutal bluntness and scaly, armored hide, paced down the line like a predator surveying a buffet of incompetence. His yellow eyes gleamed with anticipation. This was his favorite part, watching untested cadets crack under scrutiny. Each cadet had spent weeks preparing their kits. Some had engineered personalized climate regulation devices. Others hauled portable nutrient synthesizers, collapsible defense turrets, and water extraction systems capable of pulling moisture from airless rocks. Many had invested in redundant layers of tools, spare fuel cells, surgical-grade med kits, and field drones for mapping the terrain. The piles in front of each cadet told stories of their species' fears and beliefs about survival. The taller the pile, the more confident the cadet seemed to stand. Greln was halfway through the line, stopping to sneer or grunt at various pieces of equipment when he saw her. Ava Reed, the only human in the class, a second-year cadet from Earth, barely 20 years old, with sun-creased skin, tightly braided brown hair, and a reputation for speaking only when necessary. She stood still, her eyes fixed forward, arms relaxed but ready. Before her lay a single backpack, light green, canvas, and well-worn. It looked like something a child might take on a weekend camping trip. No visible armor plating, no energy core, no hovering compartments, no biometric locks. Just a standard, almost nostalgic Earth hiking bag with reinforced seams and a few exterior loops holding a carabiner, a tightly rolled tarp, and what looked like a length of cord. Greln stopped. He stared. Then he let out a low growl of amusement that rippled into a loud laugh. Nearby cadets turned their heads, some openly grinning, others trying to suppress their chuckles. "Is this a joke?" Greln boomed, raising his voice loud enough for the entire yard to hear. "Did your people forget to ship your real equipment, cadet?" He leaned in closer, the scales on his jaw twitching as he squinted. "Or is Earth's plan to test how fast you die?" Ava didn't flinch. She didn't look at him, she didn't reply. Greln circled her like a wolf testing the patience of prey. "Speak, cadet," he barked. "Is this all you brought?" "Yes, Commander," she replied calmly. Greln snorted. "You'll be the first to call for evac. I give you 6 hours before something eats you, or you break your leg trying to climb a vine." "Yes, Commander," she repeated. He wanted a reaction, panic, indignation, even the smallest tremor in her stance, but she gave him none. Just those flat, steady words and a look that didn't ask for approval. He held his stare on her for a few more seconds, then turned and continued down the line, muttering something about primitive species and overconfidence in twine and folklore. The laughter died down, but the glances lingered. Cadets from the Scorvian cluster whispered behind folded wings. A crystalline being from the Vasari system tapped its finger against its translucent chest, humming in mild amusement. The Geltok twins, long-limbed and insectoid, gave each other synchronized head tilts that expressed doubt and pity, but Ava remained unmoved. Back in the barracks later that evening before deployment, the conversations swirled with excitement and strategy. Most cadets bragged about their exotic gadgets or rehearsed field scenarios. One boasted about how his heat shield could withstand lava temperatures. Another showed off a palm-sized AI assistant capable of projecting full holographic maps of unexplored terrain. Ava sat alone on her bunk, checking the contents of her backpack in silence. She touched each item briefly, not for performance, just to be sure it was all there. Not a gram wasted, not a tool without purpose. She had grown up camping in the Pacific Northwest, backpacking with her father and older brother through rain-soaked pine forests and mosquito-ridden marshlands. No drones, no autopiloted medkits. Just matches, tarp, compass, and instinct. Her father had taught her how to identify edible plants, how to find the coldest part of a stream, how to dig a latrine away from camp. Her brother had shown her how to start a fire even when everything was wet, and how to wrap a twisted ankle using just a t-shirt and some branches. When she was 12, she'd spent 3 days lost during a school wilderness trip. She found her way back by reading the moss on the trees. So when the notice came about the Orion Academy's jungle drop, she didn't turn to catalogs or tech expos. She emptied a drawer marked Old Earth Stuff and packed what she knew would work. Duct tape, steel striker, microfiber towel, rehydrated food packets, thread, a razor blade hidden in the seam, no gear requiring power, nothing that would betray her with a blinking light when it failed. The morning of the drop, all cadets were called back to the inspection yard. The suns were low, casting long shadows. Hover shuttles roared above, preparing for departure. Greln stood on the platform, arms crossed, flanked by other instructors. "Last call for cowards," he barked. "Once you land, no messages out for 5 days. If you make it back alive, you pass. If not," he shrugged, "we send a cleaning drone." Ava took her place in the third shuttle between a gel-talk cadet who hissed nervously and a robotic scout from the Clintar Syndicate who refused to make eye contact. As the engines hummed and the craft lifted, she adjusted the straps of her backpack, letting its familiar weight settle against her spine. While others tapped at devices or checked weapon settings, she closed her eyes and recalled the rustle of fir trees and the smell of wood smoke. No one knew yet, but by the end of the week, the Academy wouldn't be laughing at her pack. They'd be studying it. The shuttle jolted as it entered the atmosphere of Sector 11 Gamma, rattling with the turbulence that came from punching through a dense storm layer. Inside the dim interior, the cadets braced themselves in silence. The walls trembled, light flickered, and condensation hissed from vents overhead. None of the safety protocols had been activated yet. This was part of the test. Ava held the overhead strap with one hand and kept her breathing steady. The flickering emergency red light caught the edge of her expression, not afraid but focused. She felt the descent in her bones before the shuttle even touched ground. When the hatch dropped open with a hiss, humid air poured in, thick with decay and heat. The smell was overwhelming, rotting vegetation, sulfur, and a metallic tang that hinted at something alien and possibly alive. The instructor on board shouted the code phrase, "Challenge initiated." One by one, the cadets stepped out onto the jungle floor. Ava moved quickly but without haste. The second her boots touched the mossy surface, her eyes adjusted to the low light filtering through the dense emerald canopy. The foliage above was too thick for direct sun, but streaks of orange light spilled between the branches, casting mottled shadows that moved as though alive. Every sound was amplified. The shriek of some winged creature far off, the slow drip of water onto leaves, the buzz of flying insects unnaturally large and slow. She didn't pause to observe. She began moving east. The rules were clear. Survive for 5 full days in the jungle with only what you brought. No outside contact, no remote assistance. The jungle would test you, not only through wildlife and terrain, but through engineered disruptions. Localized storms, electromagnetic pulses, and deceptive auditory hallucinations. This was no simulation. It had been designed by former war tacticians and xenobiologists working together to recreate chaos. A single mistake could leave a cadet injured, infected, or dead. By the second hour, she was already kilometers from the drop site. Most cadets were still setting up static camps or trying to map the immediate perimeter, trusting in their equipment to shield them. Ava trusted her instinct more. She moved light, sticking to elevated ground when possible, avoiding dense vine zones where creatures could lie hidden, and marking her path with tiny notches in tree bark. A trick she learned from her brother, who never relied on digital navigation in unfamiliar woods. By midday, the heat had become nearly unbearable. Sweat soaked her shirt, and her breathing became shallow, but she didn't slow. She pulled a small cloth from her pack, dipped it in a muddy stream, and wiped her face. The water was unfiltered and stank of tannins, but she wasn't drinking it. That would come later, once she found a suitable clearing. Not long after, she heard it. A scream, sharp, sudden, then cut off. It came from her right, perhaps 200 meters away. She stopped. It wasn't her concern. The instructors had made it clear. Help was not rewarded, and interaction was discouraged. But the scream wasn't from a predator. It was from another cadet. A male voice, probably young, probably panicked. She exhaled once, then veered toward the sound. She found him wedged between the roots of a massive tree, half submerged in thick mud, his pack lying beside him. One of his legs had sunk too deep and twisted beneath the surface, and every movement dragged him further in. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Help me!" he gasped, clutching at a vine that was clearly too weak to support his weight. "Please!" She didn't speak. She dropped her bag beside the tree, pulled out a length of paracord and tied one end to the solid trunk. Then she looped the other around his torso beneath the arms. She signaled for him to stop moving. Using a simple lever technique and a thick branch for counterweight, she pulled him out inch by inch, ignoring the leeches that clung to his arms and neck. Once he was free, she threw a blanket over him, handed him a ration bar, and poured a capful of water from her collapsible bottle. Then she left. She didn't wait for gratitude. He tried to speak, but she was already gone, disappearing into the green like a ghost. By late afternoon, she found a small ridge with good elevation and visibility in 3 directions. She examined the ground. No fresh scat, no predator tracks, and no acidic fungus patches that would eat through a tent. This was the spot. She cleared the area, pulled her compact hammock from the backpack, and secured it between 2 trees. Over it, she stretched a tarp angled to redirect rainfall and strung up her cooking line. The sun dipped below the canopy, turning the jungle a deep blue, then black. Insects howled and snapped around her, but she lit no fire. Instead, she used a heat patch wrapped in foil beneath her metal cup to warm a thin soup. Steam rose silently. She ate with slow, deliberate movements, listening to the forest as it came alive. Somewhere far off, something large moved through the brush. Too heavy to be a cadet, too slow to be a predator on the hunt. She placed her food wrappers in a sealed bag, hoisted it into the trees, and tied it high above with a counterweight. Then she took a chemical-treated cloth and wiped her skin clean of scent markers. She slipped into her hammock, zipped the mesh shut, and wrapped herself in her emergency blanket. Her only light was a dim red clip lamp that barely illuminated her notebook, where she sketched the terrain she'd crossed and marked potential shelter zones. Elsewhere in the jungle, cadets wrestled with malfunctioning tents, short-circuited auto heaters, and glowing equipment that attracted predators. One tried to activate his satellite tracker to call for help, only to discover that the signal was being jammed. Another cadet's water filtration drone fell into a swamp and powered down with a hiss. Panic began to bloom in small, silent pockets. No one knew where the others were. No one dared shout. But Ava slept. High above the jungle floor, shielded by canvas, protected by instincts, she closed her eyes and let her body melt into the quiet hum of night. There was no panic in her breath, no tension in her muscles. She had no digital compass, no remote security perimeter, no hover camera watching her back. All she had was her mind, and the backpack no one believed in. Rain started falling just after midnight. It wasn't the gentle kind that lulled you to sleep. It was the sudden, punishing downpour unique to jungle moons with volatile microclimates. Sheets of water slammed against the canopy, some crashing straight through the weaker patches to splatter across the undergrowth. Mud shifted, roots groaned under the weight of accumulated water, and trees swayed with slow menace. Ava opened her eyes before the first drop struck her tarp. She'd sensed the shift in pressure while she slept. She moved quietly, adjusting the pitch of her rain shelter to let the water slide off at a sharper angle. Her motions were smooth, instinctive. With practiced hands, she slipped on a waterproof layer from a vacuum-sealed pouch and cinched the hood around her chin. The hammock rocked gently beneath her, but she showed no signs of unease. Rain didn't scare her. It was noise, chaos, but familiar chaos. She had camped through worse on Earth, where storms screamed through pine valleys like banshees. As the storm intensified, distant flashes of light flickered behind the treetops, blue arcs, artificial and precise. Ava watched silently. Lightning didn't strobe in perfect intervals. Somewhere deeper in the sector, one of the automated hazard modules had activated, either a storm simulator or a failed EMP burst meant to disorient cadets who relied on tech. That meant some of them were likely scrambling in confusion, their devices compromised. She pulled her blanket closer and waited for sunrise. By morning, the jungle was steaming. The rain had stopped, but water clung to everything in heavy droplets. She lowered her food bag, checked for damage, none. Her boots sank slightly into the softened ground as she began to pack. She moved fast, methodically drying and stowing her tarp, folding the hammock and re-securing the items in her backpack. Once it was sealed, she lifted it onto her back with a fluid motion, barely making a sound. She took one last look around the clearing to confirm she'd left no trace, then turned north. She walked for hours, occasionally stopping to inspect prints, identify plants, or listen to the rhythms of the forest. There was a logic to the chaos. Predators moved during the heat of the day. Smaller creatures hid in the root systems. Strange, bird-like things squawked high above when air pressure dropped. Ava navigated using these signals, not maps. She had sketched her own markers, cliffs in the shape of tusks, a river bend shaped like a sickle, and she followed them without hesitation. Just before midday, she heard the telltale rustle of movement behind her. Not animal, not predator. Footsteps, sloppy, too loud, stumbling. She pivoted and dropped low, eyes scanning the foliage. A moment later, a cadet burst through the brush. His uniform was torn, face streaked with mud, panic all over his posture. He nearly tripped trying to stop when he saw her. "You, thank the stars," he said, breath hitching. "Do you have water? I lost my pack yesterday and my synth shut down during the storm." Ava didn't respond right away. Her eyes moved over his form. No bleeding, no fractures, no signs of venom or parasite infection, just exhaustion and dehydration. She nodded once, then unscrewed her bottle and handed him a measured amount. He drank greedily, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Name's Revik," he said. "From the file sector. You're Ava, right? The Earth cadet?" She nodded again, taking her bottle back and resealing it. "I didn't expect you to still be in this thing," he muttered, glancing around nervously. "Half the cadets are already down. Some got lost in that swamp yesterday. Others couldn't get a fire going in the rain. One girl tried to sleep inside a root system and got stung by something. Screamed all night." She raised her eyebrows slightly, but said nothing. "I thought humans weren't built for this," he said with a nervous laugh. "But you seem fine." She shouldered her pack and began walking again. He hesitated, then followed. For the next few kilometers, Revik filled the silence with nervous chatter. He asked her questions, rambled about malfunctioning drones, cursed the academy, and ranted about the lack of extraction points. Ava let him talk. She wasn't interested in conversation, but he seemed less dangerous talking than if she left him behind and panicked alone. By early evening, they came across a wide river, dark and slow-moving. The banks were slick and the water carried debris, chunks of plant matter, bones, and half-dissolved hunks of something unidentifiable. Revik hesitated. "We're not crossing that," he said. "There could be anything in there." She didn't argue. She began gathering large sticks, scanning the shore for vines and stones. Within 20 minutes, she had constructed a crude but stable raft using nothing but paracord and salvaged bamboo-like poles. Revik stared. "You're kidding," he said. "You've done this before?" She pushed the raft into the water, stepped on, and offered no invitation. Revik groaned and followed. The river was quiet except for the slap of water against the poles. As they floated, strange shapes moved beneath the surface just far enough to remain out of sight. One, larger than the rest, followed them for several minutes. Revik grew pale but said nothing. Ava reached into her pocket and quietly unwrapped a packet of salt and minerals, then dumped it overboard on the opposite side of the raft. The shadow beneath the water shifted course toward the scent. They reached the far bank before sundown. Once on land, Revik collapsed against a tree, panting. "You're not normal," he muttered. "You don't talk, you don't panic, and you build boats like you're on vacation." Ava started unpacking for the night. She didn't respond. As she set up her tarp and hammock again, Revik sat in silence. Something about the jungle had broken his bravado. The longer he watched her work, the more unsettled he seemed, not by the danger, but by how calmly she moved through it. "Why do you even want to pass this challenge?" he asked suddenly. "You're already better than half the officers at the academy." She paused for a moment, glanced at him, then returned to her setup. Revik sighed. "Forget it." That night, as Ava lay in her hammock, she heard him crying softly. She didn't look. She didn't speak. This jungle didn't just test your skills. It peeled you back layer by layer, revealing what was left when the devices failed and the rules disappeared. She tightened the zipper on her netting and stared up through the canopy. Above her, stars blinked in fractured patterns. Below her, silence grew heavier, and around her, cadets continued to vanish. Morning came muted, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. Thick fog hung low between the trees, clinging to vines and hovering over the ground like a ghost. Ava rose before the light fully broke through. She moved slowly, her muscles tight from the cold and the damp, but her mind already charting the day ahead. The air was heavy, saturated with tension. Something had changed. She felt it in her spine. She disassembled her shelter with practiced precision. Revik was still asleep beneath a makeshift canopy she had helped him secure the previous night. He mumbled in his sleep, rolling onto his side, sweat beading on his forehead. His breathing was uneven. She crouched beside him and placed a hand lightly on his wrist. His pulse thudded too fast. She peeled back his collar. A swollen red welt stretched across his neck where something had stung him. His skin pulsed faintly beneath the irritation, and his veins darkened slightly toward the shoulder. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small metal tin the size of a matchbox. Inside were 5 Earth-based anti-venom capsules, designed for broad-spectrum bites. She had packed them for exactly this reason. Not for herself, but because someone would be stupid enough to sleep near roots without netting. She tilted his head gently and pressed the capsule to his lips. He stirred, half-conscious, then swallowed. She followed it with water. Within seconds, his breath steadied. He opened his eyes a sliver, saw her, and whispered, "Thanks." She nodded once and stood. There was no time to waste. She packed the rest of her gear and left him instructions scratched into the dirt with a stick. Rest. Move northeast along the ridge when strong enough. 2 clearings ahead. She didn't wait. She moved on. By mid-morning, the jungle's mood shifted from ominous to volatile. The usual background noises, the chittering of small creatures, the rustling in the canopy had gone still. No birds screamed, no insects buzzed. Only the sound of Ava's boots moving through undergrowth broke the silence. She paused frequently now, checking tree trunks, scanning the forest floor, listening for anything out of place. Then she found the tracks. Deep impressions in the mud, far too wide to belong to a cadet, too ordered to be animal. Equipment transport, 4-wheeled, low-pressure treads, half buried beneath fallen foliage. She crouched and ran her fingers through the tracks. Cold, recent. She followed them without hesitation. After a quarter-kilometer, she smelled it. Ozone, scorched plastic, and coolant. She crept through a narrow corridor of brush and saw it. An unmanned Academy transport drone split down the center, its cargo module torn open. Scattered across the ground were metal containers, some cracked, others intact, but it wasn't what she saw that made her breath hitch, it was what she heard. Breathing, not hers. She slid silently behind the largest wrecked crate and peered around it. A cadet, male, Treshnian, with pale skin and deep-set green eyes, sat slumped against the frame of the drone. His leg was caught beneath the shattered chassis, pinned by a twisted section of alloy. Blood pooled under him, dark and slow, his breathing shallow. One of his arms was wrapped in a ripped bandage, but it had already soaked through. He saw her and blinked hard, trying to speak. She stepped into view. He rasped, "It came from nowhere!" She knelt beside him, her fingers already searching his pulse, examining the wound. His leg was crushed. She couldn't lift the wreckage without leverage. He grabbed her wrist. "Don't waste time, it's still close, it waits." She didn't answer. She pulled a compact airbag from her pack, placed it under the edge of the wreckage, and connected a small hand pump. As it inflated slowly, lifting the metal, she looped a length of cord under his arms and braced herself. When the pressure reached its max, she hauled him out in one movement and dragged him several feet into the jungle, just far enough to shield them from sight. He groaned in pain, gripping his side. "You're the human girl," he mumbled. "I thought you died on day 1. She ignored the comment. She gave him water, cut away the bandage, cleaned the wound, and sprinkled a powdered antiseptic from a sealed pouch. Then she reset the leg, not to walk, but to keep it from further damage. His scream shattered the silence for a split second before he bit it back, jaw clenched tight. She pulled out a flare. Not digital. Chemical. "Evac?" he asked, voice strained. She nodded. She lit the flare and placed it in a broken crate. It would burn slow, smokeless, and emit a frequency only the Academy's emergency drones could detect. If the jungle interference didn't block it, he'd be picked up within the next few hours. She stood. "You're leaving?" he asked. She stared at him. "Right," he muttered. "Of course you are." She turned and disappeared back into the brush. By late afternoon, the fog had lifted, replaced by rising heat. The jungle began to feel wrong again. Trees leaned at odd angles, bark rippled with fungus that hadn't been there the day before, and the shadows under roots grew deeper, more still. Ava climbed the ridge she'd been heading for, using a root-covered slope to reach the summit. From there, she could see the valley below. Smoke rose in two places, one thin from the flare, the other thick and oily further east. She frowned. Something had gone wrong beyond the challenge parameters. She descended quickly. As she moved, a screech rang out, metallic, mechanical, but not artificial. It came from somewhere near the path ahead. She froze behind a thick tree, lowered her body, and waited. A shape emerged between the trunks. Quadruped, not registered in any Academy field manual. Its movements were too fluid, like metal soaked in muscle. Its back shimmered with adaptive camouflage, and its head turned slowly, scanning. It wasn't part of the simulation. It didn't belong. She watched as it sniffed the ground, then shifted direction, heading toward the flare site. Her jaw tensed. If the drone didn't arrive before the creature, the cadet wouldn't survive. She couldn't get there fast enough. But maybe, just maybe, she could draw it off. She removed her emergency mirror from the backpack, clipped it to a retractable cord, and waited. When the creature passed beneath the next ridge outcrop, she swung the mirror into a patch of filtered light. A single flash of sunlight reflected across the jungle floor. The creature paused. It turned toward her. Perfect. She backed away, slow, careful. Then she ran. Branches whipped her arms, thorns scraped her skin, but she didn't stop. She moved in zigzags, hopping over logs, ducking beneath hanging vines, staying just out of reach. Behind her, the creature hissed and thundered forward, no longer cautious. It was hunting now. She led it to the gulch, narrow, deep, slick with moss-covered stone. One misstep and a body would slide straight down into the ravine. She reached the edge and leapt to the other side, catching a hanging root mid-air. Her boots slammed into the far wall and she scrambled up, using the root as leverage. The creature followed. Its weight cracked the edge of the gulch. As it leapt, Ava drew her final trap. A length of cord stretched across the narrow gap, anchored to a loop she'd placed earlier. The creature hit it mid-air. The force redirected it sideways just enough. It slammed into the rock wall and tumbled. A second later, it vanished into the ravine below, screaming all the way down. She didn't wait to see the result. She turned and disappeared into the jungle once again, her breath shallow but steady. The backpack thudded once against her spine, still light, still enough. Dawn broke in bands of gold and red, spilling across the jungle in wide, bleeding strokes. Ava stood on the highest ledge of the cliff face she had reached just before nightfall. Her shoulders ached from the sprint, her legs bore fresh scratches and dried streaks of mud, and her breath had long since lost its rhythm. Yet her eyes remained sharp. From here, she could see the final checkpoint, a wide, circular clearing half a kilometer ahead, ringed with motion sensors and thermal boundary poles. The Academy didn't mark finish lines with flags or horns. The end of the challenge was just another piece of terrain, quiet and unspectacular. Only those who crossed the perimeter would trigger the recall drone, alerting the instructors hidden beyond orbit that one more cadet had survived. Ava didn't move right away. She waited until the sky shifted fully into morning. Nothing stirred in the valley. No shapes, no movement, no other cadets. Her fingers tapped the side of her backpack absently. It was lighter now, barely half the weight it had been 5 days ago. Inside, a few remaining essentials. 1 meal ration, half a bottle of water, a folded tarp, 2 chemical heat pads, and her notebook. She began her descent. The path was steep, but she moved with fluid confidence. Vines hung in thick ropes from the canopy, and slick stones jutted from the slope like broken teeth. She navigated around them with ease. Her body responded as if this place was familiar, because it had become so. Her boots made no more sound than the fall of a leaf. The jungle didn't resist her anymore. It had tested her and failed to break her. She reached the base of the ridge and approached the perimeter. A slight hum vibrated through the soil, subtle and electric. The sensors were active. She took one final step over the line. A soft chime clicked behind the trees. Seconds later, a silver drone descended from the sky, long-legged and insectile, hovering just above the ground. Its primary lens scanned her from boots to brow. Then its speaker crackled to life. "Cadet Reed, Ava, Earth." She nodded. "Final checkpoint registered, completion verified, await transport." Ava exhaled, just once, slowly. The drone projected a holographic map showing the return shuttle's location and estimated arrival. 11 minutes. She moved to a moss-covered rock and sat down, resting her elbows on her knees. Her head tilted up slightly, and she let her muscles relax for the first time in nearly a week. Far off, something crashed through the underbrush. She stood again, silent, alert. Revik stumbled into view, limping, one hand clutched to his ribs, the other dragging a broken walking pole. His uniform was torn, half his face smeared with dirt and dried blood. When he saw her, he laughed, weakly, almost in disbelief. "You made it," he said, voice hoarse. "Of course you did." She stepped forward and caught him before he collapsed. She eased him down beside the rock and handed him her last water bottle. He drank in greedy gulps, then sagged back, eyes half shut. "I followed your notches," he murmured. "The ones you carved in the trees. Thought they were nothing. But they led me here." She didn't respond. She just watched the treetops for signs of more movement. He chuckled. "You saved a bunch of us, you know. That Treshnian guy, he got picked up. Said a human girl patched him up and vanished like smoke." He turned his head toward her. "You never even said your name to me." "Ava," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Good name." The drone returned moments later, this time with a wide landing frame attached beneath it. Revik was lifted carefully into the harness, secured and stabilized with a sedative mist. The drone acknowledged Ava with a single blink of its lens, then ascended through the canopy, vanishing into the morning sky. Ava stood alone once more in the clearing. Above her, clouds thickened into a pale veil. The jungle exhaled around her in gentle rustles, as if releasing her from its grasp. She took her notebook from the backpack and flipped it open. The last page held a hand-drawn map, her own creation, etched day by day with marks and symbols only she understood. She added one more mark beside the perimeter line, a circle with an X. Then she closed the book and looked up as a second drone, a full-sized retrieval shuttle, descended with a quiet roar. Its bay doors opened, revealing a clean white interior lined with recovery pods and sterilization tech. A figure stood at the edge of the platform, Commander Greln. He wore a neutral expression as she stepped aboard. His yellow eyes locked with hers for a long moment. Then he stepped aside without speaking. Inside the shuttle, the silence was padded, artificial. Machines hummed softly. Sanitization mists hissed from the ceiling. Ava dropped her backpack into the designated bin marked Cadet Debrief Items, but hesitated before releasing it. She opened the top flap one last time and pulled out the notebook. The rest, she let go. Greln walked over as she strapped into her seat. "I reviewed your footage," he said, voice low and grating. "Your flare, the raft, the gulch trap, that mirror trick, the minimalist packing." She said nothing. He stared at her for a few seconds longer. Then, to her quiet astonishment, he gave a short nod, not of approval, but of acknowledgement. "Cadet Reed," he said, turning away, "remind me never to underestimate your species again." She leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. The shuttle lifted off. From the window, the jungle shrank away, growing smaller with every second. The canopy that had once swallowed her now looked like nothing more than a sea of leaves. The rivers, once wide and dangerous, narrowed to silver threads. The cliffs became ridges. The threats became memories. Hours later, back at the Orion Intergalactic Academy, her arrival triggered a quiet stir. No fanfare, no announcement, but whispers rippled through the corridors that the human girl returned with a near-empty bag. That the instructors uploaded her footage to the Academy archives. That the itemized list of her gear was already being reviewed by senior training officers. That Commander Greln had made a formal request to include Earth-based tactical minimalism in the next semester's curriculum. Weeks later, the Academy's North Atrium displayed a new addition to its wall of merit. Not a portrait, not a trophy, just a photograph. a weathered green backpack suspended behind glass. Below it, a plaque read, Ava Reed, Sector 11 Gamma survivor. Prepared, precise, quiet. She carried less. She carried enough. And the rest of the galaxy began to understand what Earth had always known. Survival isn't about tools. It's about knowing how to use what fits in your hands, what fits in your head, and what you carry in your heart.